The microphone slipped from the principal's hand and hit the wooden table with a sharp crack. Nobody moved. Not the parents sitting in the front row, not the teachers standing along the walls, not even the students who had been whispering moments earlier, because everyone in that room had just heard the same accusation. Mr. Hayes was the only person with access to the records room after hours. Principal Annalise Whitaker stood beneath the bright lights of the school auditorium, dressed in a perfectly pressed navy suit, holding a folder against her chest like it carried the weight of the entire institution, and across from her stood Leonard Hayes, a black man in his late 60s, a man wearing a faded gray security uniform, a man who had spent 8 years opening doors before sunrise, checking empty hallways after midnight, and fixing things nobody noticed until they stopped working. To everyone watching, he looked exactly like what they had already decided he was: the night guard, the man who walked the halls while everyone important went home. But what nobody in that auditorium knew was that Leonard Hayes had once spent 22 years sitting behind a judge's bench. And within the next few hours, every person who had looked past him would learn the cost of confusing silence with weakness. Because Leonard Hayes had spent his entire life watching people reveal who they really were when they believed nobody important was listening. And that night, the people who thought they held all the power were about to discover they had been speaking in front of the one person who knew exactly how to find the truth. If you have ever been ignored, underestimated, or treated like your voice did not matter, this story is for you. Every morning at 5:15, before the first student stepped through the gates of Westbridge Academy, Leonard Hayes unlocked the front entrance. The campus was different before the noise arrived. The polished floors reflected the pale morning light. The classroom sat empty. The trophy cases stood untouched, filled with decades of achievements belonging to students whose names were printed on plaques and banners. Leonard liked those hours. Quiet hours gave people away. A building always told the truth when nobody was performing for an audience. He pushed his cart through the main hallway, checking the lights, testing the doors, making notes in the small maintenance notebook he carried in his pocket. The notebook was old. The cover was worn. The handwriting inside was careful and precise, the same kind of handwriting that once filled thousands of pages of legal decisions. But nobody at Westbridge knew that. To them, Leonard was simply Mr. Hayes, the night security guard, the man who waved at students, fixed broken locks, and reminded teenagers not to leave their backpacks blocking the emergency exits. And Leonard was perfectly comfortable letting people believe that. His daughter, Maya, always asked him why. "Daddy," she had said one evening while sitting across from him at their kitchen table, "why don't you tell people what you used to do?" Leonard had smiled while turning the small blue fountain pen between his fingers. The pen was scratched near the cap, with a tiny silver mark where the paint had chipped away. Maya had given it to him 3 years earlier, after saving her allowance for months. She called it Bluebird, because, according to her, a bluebird means something good is coming. Leonard had never corrected her. Some things were more valuable because of the person who believed in them. "I don't need everyone to know my past," he told her. Maya tilted her head. "Why?" Leonard placed the pen carefully beside his notebook. "Because character matters most when nobody is watching." She had thought about that answer for a long time. Then she smiled. "You always answer like a courtroom." Leonard laughed softly. Maybe she was right. Old habits stayed with a person. Westbridge Academy was the kind of school that appeared in magazines. Large stone buildings, private gardens, a reputation built over generations. Families drove expensive cars through the gates every morning. Parents donated money for new programs. Students competed for scholarships, university placements, and recognition. The school was proud of its image, especially Principal Annalise Whitaker. She had been running Westbridge for 6 years and had turned reputation into a personal mission. Every decision was measured. Every announcement was polished. Every problem was something to be contained before anyone outside the school could see it. Leonard had met her many times, usually when something needed fixing: a jammed office door, a broken security camera, a leaking pipe in the administration wing. She always thanked him, but she rarely looked at him while doing it. Not because she was openly cruel. That would have been easier to understand. It was something quieter. A habit of seeing certain people as part of the background, like furniture, like walls, like the floor beneath her shoes. Leonard noticed those things. He always noticed. The scholarship scandal began on a Monday morning. A student's name disappeared from the final scholarship list, then another. By lunchtime, rumors were spreading through the school. By afternoon, parents were calling. By evening, the board demanded answers. And by the next morning, Leonard found himself standing inside the auditorium, surrounded by people who had never once asked his opinion on anything. The same auditorium where he had repaired the stage lights last winter. The same place where he had quietly watched thousands of students graduate. Only this time, he wasn't standing in the shadows. He was standing at the center of attention. Principal Whitaker opened the folder in her hands. An internal review has identified unauthorized changes made to scholarship records. A murmur moved through the room. She continued. Those changes appear to have occurred during overnight hours. Her eyes moved toward Leonard. Just briefly, but long enough. A person could miss it if they were not paying attention. Leonard was paying attention. The room shifted. Parents looked at him differently. A teacher near the doorway lowered her eyes. Someone whispered something behind him. Leonard reached into his pocket and touched the edge of Bluebird. Not because he needed comfort. Because sometimes a person needed a reminder of who they were before the world decided who they were supposed to be. He looked at Principal Whitaker. She looked back. And for the first time in years, Leonard Hayes realized something. She did not know him. Not really. She only knew the version of him she had chosen to see. And that was about to become her biggest mistake. The first thing Leonard did after leaving the auditorium was return to work. That was the part people found most confusing. They expected anger. They expected shouting. They expected a man accused in front of hundreds of people to defend himself immediately, to demand answers, to make a scene. Leonard did none of those things. At 6:30 that evening, he was back in the east hallway replacing a broken motion sensor near the science wing. The small metal screws rested neatly in his palm. The screwdriver turned slowly between his fingers. A student walking by stopped and stared. "Mr. Hayes?" Leonard looked up. The student was a junior named Jordan Mitchell, one of the scholarship applicants whose name had disappeared from the list. "You okay?" Jordan asked. Leonard looked at the sensor above the door. Then he looked back at the young man. "Why wouldn't I be?" Jordan hesitated. Because everyone in the school knew what had happened. Everyone had an opinion. Some people believed Leonard was guilty because he was the easiest explanation. Others believed something felt wrong, but they were too uncomfortable to say it. Jordan lowered his voice. "My mom said they shouldn't have blamed you without proof." Leonard tightened the final screw. "Your mother is right." The student nodded. Then he walked away. Leonard watched him disappear around the corner. A small detail. A small conversation. Most people would have forgotten it within minutes. Leonard did not. He remembered everything. 8 years earlier, when Leonard first arrived at Westbridge Academy, nobody knew what to make of him. The school had expected someone younger, someone more energetic, someone who would treat security work like a temporary job. Instead, they got a quiet man who arrived early, stayed late, and never complained. He learned every hallway, every entrance, every camera angle, every routine. He knew which teachers stayed late grading papers, which students came early to practice music, which employees skipped lunch because they were too busy, not because he was suspicious. Because understanding people had always been his work, long before Westbridge, long before the uniform, long before the security badge. Leonard Hayes had spent most of his adult life inside courtrooms. He became a judge at 41. At the time, newspapers described him as a person who brought patience back into a system that often moved too quickly. He was known for reading every document, every statement, every piece of evidence. People who appeared before him learned something quickly. Judge Hayes did not care who walked into his courtroom wearing expensive clothing. He cared about what the facts said when nobody was trying to impress him. But after 22 years on the bench, Leonard left. Not because of scandal, not because he failed, because life changed. His wife, Evelyn, passed away after a long illness. The house became too quiet. The courtroom became another place where he was surrounded by other people's pain. And after his retirement, Leonard wanted something different, something simple, a schedule, a place where he could work honestly and come home to his daughter. So he traded a judge's robe for a security uniform. Most people saw that as a step down. Leonard never did. A job was not measured by the title attached to it. It was measured by the person doing it. The next morning, Principal Whitaker called him into her office. The room was exactly what everyone expected. Large desk, glass shelves, awards displayed perfectly. Photos with important people arranged at carefully chosen angles. Leonard stood near the door. Whitaker remained seated. "Mr. Hayes, I want to be clear that this conversation is confidential." Leonard said nothing. She opened a folder. "The school is conducting an investigation. I understand. And until that investigation is complete, your access to certain areas will be restricted." Leonard looked at her. "Restricted how?" "You will remain employed, but you will no longer have access to administrative records, faculty offices, or the East Archive hallway." The East Archive hallway. That detail caught his attention. Not because he showed it, because he remembered. 3 nights earlier, he had walked past that hallway and noticed something unusual. The archive door had been opened after midnight. The system recorded the access. But the record had been erased the following morning. Leonard had noticed because he noticed everything. He had not said anything yet. He wanted to understand why. Now he knew someone else was worried about that hallway too. "Do you believe I changed those records?" Leonard asked. Principal Whitaker paused. Only for a second. But a second was enough. "I believe we have to consider every possibility." Leonard looked at the folder on her desk. Not the papers inside, the folder itself. New. Purchased recently. Prepared specifically for this meeting. "You already made your decision," he said. Whitaker's expression tightened slightly. "That is an unfair assumption." Leonard adjusted his sleeve. "No." His voice stayed calm. "It is an observation." For the first time, something changed in her face. Not anger. Something closer to discomfort, because she realized something important. The man standing in front of her was not reacting. He was evaluating, and there was a difference. That evening, Leonard arrived home later than usual. Maya was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up immediately. "You're late." Leonard placed his keys down. "Long day." She studied his face. Children noticed things adults missed, especially when they loved someone. Did something happen? Leonard walked to the refrigerator and poured himself water. For a moment he considered saying nothing, protecting her, keeping adult problems away from her. Then he looked at the small blue pen sitting beside her notebook. Bluebird, the same pen she had given him. The same reminder that truth mattered. "Yes," he said. Maya waited. "Someone made a mistake about me." Her eyebrows pulled together. "What kind of mistake?" Leonard sat across from her. "The kind where people decide what they believe before they know what happened." Maya thought about that. Then she pushed the pen toward him. "Use Bluebird." Leonard smiled. "Why?" "Because you always say the truth needs good writing." For the first time that day, Leonard laughed. Quietly, briefly, but he laughed. And Maya smiled because she knew something her father had never needed to explain. Her father was not afraid of the truth. The truth was afraid of being ignored. The next morning, Leonard returned to Westbridge. But this time, he did not just unlock doors. He started looking. Not like a security guard, like the person he had been before. And somewhere inside the school's carefully organized records, someone had left a mistake behind. A mistake only someone trained to see patterns would notice. By Thursday morning, the atmosphere at Westbridge Academy had changed. Not officially. There were no announcements, no emails sent to parents, no emergency meetings posted on the school calendar. But Leonard knew the difference between a quiet building and a building holding its breath. Teachers spoke in smaller groups near the faculty lounge. Parents lingered longer at pickup. Students looked toward the administration offices whenever they passed. Everyone was waiting for someone else to explain what was happening. and Principal Annalise Whitaker was making sure that person would never be her. The scholarship program at Westbridge was one of the school's proudest achievements. Every year, the academy reserved a number of placements for students who showed exceptional academic ability but could not afford the tuition. The program had produced doctors, engineers, researchers, and community leaders. The school celebrated those stories constantly. They appeared in brochures. They appeared during fundraising events. They appeared whenever Westbridge needed to remind wealthy donors why their contributions mattered. But behind the polished presentations was a complicated system. Applications, financial documents, academic records, recommendation letters, review committees, thousands of pages moving through dozens of hands. A system like that depended on one thing: trust. And when trust disappeared, everything underneath it became unstable. Leonard spent the first part of his shift doing exactly what everyone expected him to do. He checked doors. He walked hallways. He replaced a broken light near the music room. Nobody paid much attention. That was useful. People revealed more when they forgot someone was there. At 10:42 p.m., Leonard entered the administrative wing. The hallway was empty. The lights above him hummed softly. He stopped near the archive room. The door was closed, but the small scratch near the handle caught his eye. A fresh mark. Not there 3 nights ago. Leonard crouched down. Most people would have seen nothing. A small piece of damaged paint, a tiny line near the lock, but details had always spoken clearly to him. Someone had forced the door slightly, not enough to break it, enough to create an opening. He stood slowly. Then he looked at the security panel beside the entrance. The access log showed nothing unusual. That was the unusual part. A door opened after midnight. Someone entered. Someone removed the record. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Leonard reached into his pocket. His fingers touched Bluebird. Not because he needed luck, because he needed patience. Patience had always been more valuable. The next morning, Leonard found himself called into another meeting. This time, Principal Whitaker was not alone. 2 members of the school board sat across from him, a man named Richard Hale, who handled finance, and a woman named Simone Caldwell, who oversaw community relations. Leonard recognized the setup immediately. More people meant more distance. More distance meant fewer personal decisions. They wanted this to look official. "Mr. Hayes," Richard began, "we understand you have concerns regarding the investigation." Leonard sat quietly. "I have observations." Richard glanced at Whitaker. The correction was subtle, but Leonard noticed. They wanted him to use the word concerns. Concerns sounded emotional. Observations sounded factual. That difference mattered. "Your observations involve the scholarship records?" Simone asked. "Yes." "And how exactly would you know anything about those records?" The question sounded innocent. It was not. Leonard looked at her. "Because I have worked in this building for 8 years. That does not answer the question." "No," Leonard said. "It answers the one you asked." The room became still. Whitaker shifted slightly in her chair. Simone folded her hands. "Mr. Hayes, your position gives you access to the building. It does not give you authority over administrative matters." Leonard nodded. "I agree." The answer seemed to surprise them. He continued, "My job is not to manage the scholarship program." "Then why are you involved?" Leonard looked toward the window. Outside, students were crossing the courtyard, laughing, carrying books, living their normal lives while adults argued over their futures. 'Cause some of those students are being blamed for something they did not do. Nobody spoke. That was the first moment Leonard saw uncertainty. Not from Whitaker, from the board members, because accusations were easy. But protecting innocent students was different. Later that afternoon, Leonard met with a teacher named Olivia Brooks. She had been at Westbridge for 12 years. English department. Quiet. Respected. She was also the person who had looked uncomfortable during the auditorium meeting. "I saw you leave the administration wing last night," she said. Leonard looked at her. "Did you?" She lowered her voice. "I was grading papers." A pause. "After everyone left." Leonard waited. She looked toward the empty hallway. I heard someone inside the archive room. When? 11:30. Leonard said nothing. Mr. Hayes, I don't know what I heard. I don't know what it means. But you know it happened. She nodded. Yes. The hallway lights reflected in the glass beside them. Olivia looked nervous. Why are you asking me? Leonard looked at her carefully. Because you are the first person who told the truth before knowing whether it would help you. That answer stayed with her. Because she understood what he meant. Most people waited until truth became safe. Leonard had spent his life watching what happened when they waited too long. That evening, Leonard opened his old laptop at the kitchen table. Maya was already asleep. The house was quiet. The blue glow from the screen reflected against his glasses. He did not search for his old identity. He did not look for newspaper articles. He did not contact former colleagues. Not yet. He started where every good investigation began. The facts, dates, times, access records, names, patterns. And after 40 minutes, he found the first thing that did not belong. A scholarship file had been modified 3 times. The first change corrected a missing document. The second changed a financial figure. The third removed a student from consideration completely. Different accounts, different timestamps, but one thing connected all 3. The same administrative authorization code. Leonard leaned back. The code belonged to someone who should never have been able to edit the file alone. Someone at the top. He looked at the screen, then at Bluebird beside his notebook. The problem was no longer whether something had happened. The problem was how far up the truth went, and Leonard Hayes had a feeling the answer was going to make powerful people very uncomfortable. The next morning, Leonard arrived at Westbridge Academy before sunrise. Nothing about his routine changed. That was the part that bothered people. A man who had just uncovered something serious should have looked different, they thought. More nervous, more defensive, more desperate. Leonard looked exactly the same. He unlocked the front gate, turned on the hallway lights, checked the security panel, and started his shift. Because Leonard Hayes understood something most people learn too late. Panic made people careless. Calm made people reveal themselves. At 7:15 a.m., Principal Whitaker walked through the main entrance. She stopped when she saw him, not because he was there, because he was always there. That was the problem. For years, Leonard had been part of the scenery, a person people passed without really seeing, but now she saw him, and she did not like what she saw. Mr. Hayes. Leonard looked up from his cart. Good morning, Principal Whitaker. Her eyes moved briefly to the security badge on his uniform, then back to his face. I was informed you accessed administrative systems last night. Leonard remained still. I reviewed information available to me. That was not your responsibility. No. His answer came immediately. It was not. The agreement seemed to throw her off. She expected an argument. Instead, she got a fact. Whitaker stepped closer. You need to understand your position here. Leonard looked at her. Not angrily, not defensively. Just carefully. My position? Yes. She lowered her voice. You are a security employee. Your role is to maintain the building and ensure safety. Leonard glanced down the hallway. Students were arriving. Teachers were walking toward classrooms. A few people slowed down when they noticed the conversation. My role is to ensure safety, he repeated. That is correct. He nodded. Then I believe protecting students from being wrongly blamed falls within that responsibility. The hallway became quieter. Whitaker's expression changed, only slightly. But enough. She was used to employees accepting boundaries, not questioning them. You are making assumptions. No. Leonard looked directly at her. I am asking questions. And you think that gives you the right to interfere? Leonard paused. Then he said, No. A moment passed. I think the students have the right to know the truth. The conversation ended there. At least publicly. But Leonard knew it had not ended. People with power rarely ended conversations. They moved them somewhere private, somewhere controlled, somewhere where fewer people could hear. By lunchtime, rumors had spread again. This time, Leonard was the subject. A teacher mentioned that some parents were demanding he be removed from campus. A staff member said the board was considering suspension. A student overheard someone say Leonard had gone too far. The words traveled faster than facts. They always did. Leonard stood near the cafeteria entrance while students moved around him. He watched. A boy dropped his books. Another student stopped to help him. A teacher held the door open for someone carrying supplies. Small moments. Small choices. The things people did when they thought nobody important was watching. That was always where character lived. During his afternoon shift, Leonard received a message from Principal Whitaker. "Come to my office, immediately." He arrived 5 minutes later. This time, she was standing. Not sitting behind the desk. That told him something. She was uncomfortable. On her desk was a thin folder. "Mr. Hayes, I want to give you an opportunity to explain yourself." Leonard looked at the folder. "What exactly do you want me to explain?" "Your involvement." "My involvement?" She opened the folder. "Your access to records, your questions to staff members, your review of information outside your duties." Leonard listened. Then he noticed something. The folder was not about the scholarship investigation. It was about him. Someone had started building a case, not against the problem, against the person who noticed it. "Am I being investigated?" Leonard asked. Whitaker hesitated. "We are reviewing whether your actions violated school policy." Leonard looked down. There it was. The shift. The moment when protecting the institution became more important than protecting the students inside it. He had seen it before. Many times. Courtrooms. Government offices. Corporate meetings. People rarely admitted they were protecting themselves. They called it procedure. "Principal Whitaker," Leonard said. She looked up. "When I worked in another profession, I learned something." Her expression tightened. What profession was that? A simple question, but Leonard did not answer. Not yet. People often confuse authority with being correct. Whitaker stared at him. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Leonard closed the folder. "I am suggesting that the truth does not change because someone has a higher title." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Whitaker reached across the desk. "I think you should take the rest of the week off." Leonard looked at her. "Is that a request?" "It is a recommendation." Another careful word. Another attempt to soften a decision. Leonard understood. He had spent decades listening to people choose words carefully when they wanted the outcome to sound different from what it was. He picked up his security badge. "I will consider your recommendation." Whitaker watched him walk toward the door. "See, Mr. Hayes." He stopped. "You should think carefully about what happens next." Leonard turned slightly. "I have been doing that my entire life." Then he left. That evening, Maya noticed the silence before he said anything. She was sitting on the couch reading. Bluebird was clipped to the notebook beside her. "You're thinking too loudly," she said. Leonard smiled. "Is that possible? With you?" "Yes." He sat beside her. For a while, neither spoke. Then Maya looked at him. "Are they being unfair?" Leonard looked toward the window. Outside, the neighborhood lights were coming on one by one. "I think sometimes people become more worried about who finds the truth than the truth itself." Maya frowned. "That sounds bad." "It is." A pause. "But it also means someone needs to keep looking." She looked at him. "Are you going to stop?" Leonard looked down at Bluebird. The little blue pen sat quietly beside his hand. "No." The answer came softly, but it was certain. "I'm not." The next morning, Leonard walked back into Westbridge. Not as someone defending himself. Not as someone trying to prove his worth. He walked in as someone who knew exactly what he was looking for, and this time, someone noticed. A person who had spent years believing Leonard Hayes was invisible finally understood something. Invisible people saw everything. By the end of the week, Leonard Hayes was no longer just a man people ignored. He had become a problem, not because he had done anything wrong, because he had started asking questions that other people were afraid to answer. And questions were dangerous when they reached places where powerful people preferred silence. The official announcement came Friday afternoon, a short email. 4 paragraphs. Carefully written. Professional language. The kind of message designed to sound reasonable while hiding something uncomfortable. Effective immediately, Mr. Leonard Hayes will be placed on temporary administrative leave pending a review of recent actions related to school procedures. That was all it said. No accusation, no explanation, no mention of the scholarship records, no mention of the missing students, just enough information to create doubt. And doubt was often more damaging than the truth. Leonard read the email once, then he closed it. He did not forward it. He did not respond. He simply placed his phone on the kitchen table. Maya was sitting across from him finishing her homework. She noticed. Of course she noticed. You got bad news. Leonard looked at her. How do you know? You put your phone down without reading it again. He almost smiled. His daughter knew him too well. It's nothing you need to worry about. Maya lowered her pencil. Dad. That one word carried the same seriousness she had when she was younger, the same tone she used when she knew he was avoiding something. Leonard looked at her. She was not a child anymore. Not completely. She understood more than he sometimes wanted her to. They asked me not to come to work for a little while. Maya's face changed. Did they fire you? No. Are they going to? Leonard did not answer immediately, and that was answer enough. Maya looked down at the table. They think you did something. Leonard reached across and moved Bluebird away from the edge of the table. A small movement, a familiar one. I think they need someone to blame. But you didn't do anything. No. His voice stayed steady. I didn't. Maya looked at him. Then why are they doing this? Leonard looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen where they had shared dinners. The same place where his wife's old recipe cards still sat in a drawer. The same place where Maya had learned to write her name. Because sometimes people protect a system before they protect the people inside it. Maya was quiet. Then she said, That doesn't make it right. Leonard nodded. No. He looked at her. It doesn't. The hardest part was not losing the job. Leonard could survive without the paycheck for a while. He had planned for emergencies. He had saved carefully. He had lived simply. The hardest part was hearing Maya's name mentioned because of him. 2 days later, she came home from school earlier than usual. Her backpack landed beside the door. Not thrown. Placed. That told Leonard everything. What happened? Maya stood there for a moment. Then she said, Someone asked if my dad really got caught changing scholarship files. The room became still. Leonard's hand stopped halfway toward the coffee cup. Who said that? It doesn't matter. It matters. Maya looked away. It was just a kid. Leonard watched her. He saw the same thing he had seen in courtrooms. A person trying to make something smaller because admitting how much it hurt made it heavier. Maya. She looked at him. Did you tell them the truth? A question. Simple. Painful. Leonard sat down. I told them the truth. What did they say? Not everyone believes the truth immediately. Maya swallowed. That's not fair. No, it wasn't. But Leonard did not say that. Because children already knew the world was unfair. What they needed from adults was not denial. They needed examples of what to do when unfairness appeared. That night, after Maya went to sleep, Leonard returned to his old files. Not the school files. His own. A small box stored at the back of his closet. Inside were things from another life. A retirement certificate. Old photographs. Letters from former colleagues. A newspaper clipping from the day he stepped down as a judge. He looked at the picture for a long time. A younger Leonard. A courtroom behind him. A person who had spent decades being introduced by a title. Judge Leonard Hayes. He folded the clipping again, then put it away. He had no desire to become that person again. He was not interested in status. He was not interested in recognition. But he understood something now. Someone had counted on him staying quiet. Someone had looked at his uniform and assumed there was nothing behind it. They had made the same mistake everyone else made. They judged the surface. The next morning, Leonard received a phone call. It was Olivia Brooks. The teacher who had admitted hearing someone in the archive room, her voice was low. Mr. Hayes, I found something. Leonard sat up. What? I was looking through old emails. Something didn't make sense. What didn't? The scholarship committee normally requires 3 signatures before changes are approved. Leonard reached for a notebook. Go on. This year, several changes only have 2. He wrote it down. Whose signature is missing? There was silence. Then Olivia answered. Mine. Leonard stopped. Are you saying someone used your name? I don't know. Her voice shook slightly. But I never approved those changes. Leonard looked at the notes in front of him. A missing signature, a deleted access record, an altered file, a person being blamed. The pieces were moving closer together. Olivia, he said. Yes? Do not discuss this with anyone else. Why? Because whoever did this already knows how to control the story. A pause. And right now, the story is the only thing protecting them. Later that afternoon, Leonard returned to Westbridge. Not inside, just outside the gates. He stood across the street watching students leave. Parents arrived. Teachers walked out. The school looked exactly the same. That was what made it dangerous. Places rarely looked broken while something inside them was failing. His phone buzzed. A message from Maya. Bluebird is still with you, right? Leonard looked down. The small pen was in his hand. He typed back. Always. A few seconds later, her reply came. Good. Then keep writing the truth. Leonard stared at the message. Then he looked back at Westbridge Academy. For years, he had watched people walk through those gates believing the building belonged to them. But buildings did not belong to the people with the loudest voices. They belonged to the people willing to protect what happened inside them, and Leonard Hayes was not finished, not even close. For 3 days, Leonard Hayes did something most people considered impossible. He waited. Not because he was uncertain, not because he had given up, because he understood timing. A person who rushed into a fight often revealed more than they intended. A person who waited could see the entire room. And Leonard had spent his life learning how rooms worked. Every morning he sat at the same kitchen table, the same chair, the same cup of coffee, Bluebird resting beside his notebook. Maya would leave for school, and Leonard would watch through the window until she reached the sidewalk. It was a small habit, one he had started after his wife died, not because Maya needed protection every second. Because children deserved to know someone was always watching out for them, even when they were old enough to walk alone. On Monday evening, Maya came home holding a piece of paper. She placed it on the table. What's this? Leonard looked down. A permission form for an upcoming student leadership event. At the bottom was a section asking parents to confirm their occupation. Maya tapped the page. You know what I wanted to write? Leonard looked at her. What? Former judge. A small smile appeared on his face. You could. She shook her head. No. Why not? Because then everyone would act different. Leonard looked at her. That answer surprised him. Not because it was wrong, because it was exactly right. People changed when they knew someone's title. They became more careful, more polite, sometimes more respectful. But respect that appeared only after a title was revealed was not the kind of respect Leonard valued. You understand more than most adults, he said. Maya shrugged. I just pay attention. Leonard smiled. That was the family trait. That night, after Maya went to bed, Leonard sat alone. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For years after Evelyn passed, silence had felt like an empty room. Now it felt different. Like space. Like time to think. He opened the notebook. On the first page he wrote, Timeline. Then he began. March 4. Scholarship records modified. March 5. Student removed from final list. March 6. Archive access deleted. March 7th. Investigation begins. March 8th. Leonard suspended. He stopped. The pattern was clear. Too clear. The person responsible had not simply changed records. They had created a distraction. They needed someone visible. someone easy to question, someone without influence, someone everyone would believe could have done it. Leonard looked at his own name written at the bottom of the page. A security guard, not a judge, not someone with connections, not someone people expected to challenge authority. That was the strategy. And it almost worked. The next morning, Leonard received a call from Olivia Brooks. Her voice sounded different. Not afraid. Focused. I found another thing. Leonard sat down. Tell me. The scholarship files weren't the only ones changed. What else? Financial aid records. Leonard became still. Explain. There were adjustments made to several student accounts. Small ones. How small? Small enough that nobody would notice individually. He wrote that down. But together, they moved a lot of money. Leonard looked at the notes in front of him. The scholarship issue suddenly looked different. It was not just about students receiving awards. It was about money moving through the system. Who had access? Olivia answered immediately. 3 people. Leonard waited. Me, the finance office, and Principal Whitaker. The room became silent. Not because the answer surprised him, because it confirmed something he had already suspected. Later that afternoon, Leonard met Olivia outside a small coffee shop away from the school. He chose the location carefully, not because he was hiding, because he did not want anyone else dragged into this before they were ready. Olivia placed a folder on the table. I printed everything. Leonard looked at it. You shouldn't have. I know. She looked down. But I also know what happens when people stay quiet. That sentence stayed with him, because she had learned something many people never did. Silence was not always neutrality. Sometimes silence was permission. Leonard opened the folder. The documents were organized. Dates, names, changes, approvals. He studied each page. Olivia watched him. You really were trained for this, weren't you? Leonard looked up. What makes you say that? You don't read documents. She pointed at the pages. You investigate them. For a moment, Leonard said nothing. Then he closed the folder. There was a time when that was my job. Olivia looked at him carefully. What job? Leonard looked through the window. People moved along the sidewalk outside. Cars passed. The world continued, making sure people were treated fairly. She waited, but he did not say more. And somehow, that told her enough. That evening, something happened that Leonard had not expected. Maya came home upset. Not because of rumors, not because of school, because of him. I heard someone talking about you. Leonard looked up. Who? A parent. What did they say? Maya hesitated. They said people like you always think they are better than everyone else. The words sat between them. Leonard looked down. Not hurt. Thinking. People like me? Maya nodded. They meant because you were investigating. Leonard leaned back. Did they say why they thought that? No. Exactly. He picked up Bluebird. Maya, there is something important you need to understand. She listened. Sometimes, when people cannot argue with facts, they argue with the person bringing the facts. Maya looked at the pen. Is that what they're doing? Leonard nodded slowly. Yes. She was quiet. Then she asked, Are you scared? The question was simple, but Leonard did not answer quickly, because honesty mattered. Sometimes. Maya looked surprised. You are? Yes. Of what? Leonard looked at her. Of what happens when good people decide something is too difficult to fix. Maya thought about that. Then she pushed Bluebird toward him. Then fix it. Leonard smiled. Not because the problem was simple, because his daughter reminded him why he had started. That night, Leonard made one more discovery. A small detail, almost invisible, a name hidden inside an old approval record. Someone who had signed off on the scholarship changes months before anyone noticed. Not a student, not a teacher, not a staff member, a consultant hired by the school board, a person who had no reason to be touching scholarship files. Leonard wrote the name down. Then he circled it, because now the question had changed. It was no longer, who changed the records? It was, Who gave them permission? And the answer was much closer to the top than anyone expected. Leonard Hayes had spent 22 years learning one important lesson. Evidence did not need to be loud, it only needed to be connected. A single document could be dismissed. A single mistake could be explained away. A single person could be questioned. But when small facts lined up together, they became something much harder to ignore. A pattern. And patterns were where the truth usually lived. The name Leonard had written down remained on his kitchen table all night. Thomas Bellamy, educational consultant, hired by the Westbridge Board 6 months earlier. His official role was simple: review school operations, improve efficiency, recommend improvements. Nothing about scholarship records, nothing about financial aid, nothing about student accounts. Yet his authorization code appeared inside the system. That meant one of two things. Either someone gave him access, or someone wanted it to look like he had access. Leonard knew enough about investigations to understand the difference. One was corruption, the other was a setup. The following morning, Leonard visited the public library. Not because he needed information, because he needed distance. Sometimes the best place to think was somewhere nobody expected you to be. He sat at a corner table with old records spread in front of him. School board announcements, public financial reports, contract disclosures, documents most people ignored because they looked boring. But boring documents often contained the most important details: a contract, a signature, a date, a decision made quietly when nobody was paying attention. After 2 hours, Leonard found something: a payment agreement between Westbridge Academy and Bellamy Strategic Consulting. The contract had been approved by the board, signed by Principal Whitaker, but the timing was strange. The agreement began 3 weeks before the scholarship changes started. Leonard wrote the dates down. Then he noticed something else. A second signature. Not from the board, not from finance, from a committee member who had resigned shortly afterward. A person who was no longer around to answer questions. Leonard closed the folder. Someone had created layers. People who could take responsibility. People who could disappear. People who could be blamed. That afternoon, Leonard called an old friend. Not someone from the courtroom. Not someone with influence. Someone who valued facts more than appearances. Daniel Foster worked as a retired legal researcher. They had met years earlier when Leonard was still a judge. Daniel answered after 3 rings. Leonard Hayes. The voice on the other end immediately changed. Now that is a name I haven't heard in a while. Leonard smiled slightly. Hello, Daniel. A pause. How are you? Leonard looked at the documents in front of him. Working. Daniel laughed. You retired. People like us don't really retire. That made Daniel quiet, because he knew exactly what Leonard meant. What happened? Leonard explained the situation. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just facts. Names, dates, records. When he finished, Daniel was silent for several seconds. Then he said, You know what your problem always was? Leonard smiled. What? You believed everyone else cared about the truth as much as you did. Leonard looked out the window. Maybe. No. Daniel's voice softened. That was never a weakness. The next day, Leonard returned to Westbridge. Not through the front entrance, through the service entrance. The same door he had opened every morning for 8 years. A young employee at the security desk looked surprised. Mr. Hayes? Leonard nodded. I need to retrieve some personal items. The employee looked uncomfortable. Are you allowed to be here? Leonard smiled politely. That is an excellent question. The employee did not know how to respond, so Leonard walked quietly toward the security office. Inside was a small locker, a spare jacket, a notebook, a photograph of Maya from her first day of school. He placed everything into a box, then he stopped, because on the desk beside the computer was something he had not seen before, a printed access report. Someone had left it there, probably accidentally. Probably because they assumed nobody would care. Leonard picked it up. The report showed entry records for the administration wing. His eyes moved down the page. And there it was, a midnight entry. The same night the scholarship files changed, but the name attached to the entry was not Thomas Bellamy, not Principal Whitaker, not any administrator. It was Olivia Brooks. Leonard stared at the screen. For a moment, the entire investigation shifted, because this was exactly the kind of thing people used. A simple record, a believable explanation, a person who had helped him now appearing connected. He looked at the timestamp. Then he looked closer. The entry had been created manually, not automatically. Someone had added it afterward. Leonard placed the paper down, not with panic, with focus, because this was not evidence against Olivia. This was evidence that someone wanted Olivia to look guilty. That evening, Leonard met Olivia again. She looked nervous when she arrived. "You found something." Leonard placed the access report on the table. Olivia's face changed. "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because I wasn't there." Leonard watched her reaction. Not the words, the details, the way her hand tightened around her coffee cup, the way she immediately looked at the timestamp, the way she did not ask what Leonard thought. She knew. Someone had used her name. "How did you know it was fake?" Leonard asked. Olivia looked at him. "Because I was home that night." "Can anyone confirm that?" "My husband." Leonard nodded. "Good." She looked confused. "Good?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because people who tell the truth usually remember details." Olivia stared at him. "You really do think like a judge." Leonard did not answer, because this time she was right. That night, Leonard sat with the complete timeline, the scholarship changes, the financial adjustments, the consultant contract, the false access record, everything connected, but one piece was still missing. Who benefited? Who gained from removing students from scholarships? Who needed money moved quietly? Who had enough authority to make everyone else look the wrong direction? Leonard looked at the name at the center of every decision. Annalise Whitaker. He did not write her name down as guilty. Not yet. He had learned long ago that suspicion was not proof, but he did write something else. Follow the money. Then he closed the notebook. For the first time since this began, Leonard knew exactly where to look next. And whoever had underestimated the quiet man in the security uniform was about to learn the most dangerous thing about him. He was patient, but he was never finished. The first person to recognize Leonard Hayes was not someone from the school board, not a journalist, not a former colleague, not even someone who had known him during his years in the courtroom. It was a lawyer who had never met him before, and that was exactly why it mattered. The meeting happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Leonard sat across from Daniel Foster and a woman named Rebecca Monroe. Rebecca worked in education law. For 15 years, she had represented students and families dealing with school systems. Daniel had contacted her after reviewing Leonard's documents, not because Leonard needed someone to fight for him, because the evidence had reached a point where it needed someone outside the situation, someone without connections to Westbridge, someone who could look at the facts without fear. Rebecca opened the folder. She read quietly, page after page. No interruptions, no dramatic reactions, just careful attention. Leonard respected that. People who understood evidence usually moved slowly. After nearly 20 minutes, she looked up. "Where did you learn to organize information this way?" Leonard folded his hands. "I have experience." Rebecca glanced back at the documents. "This isn't school security experience." Silence. Daniel looked at Leonard. Leonard knew the moment had arrived. The moment when people stopped seeing the uniform and started seeing the person underneath. "I was a judge." Rebecca stopped. Not dramatically, just enough. "Excuse me?" "Judge Leonard Hayes." For several seconds, the only sound in the room was rain against the window. Rebecca looked at Daniel. "You knew?" Daniel nodded. "I did." She looked back at Leonard. "You retired?" "Yes." "And then you became a security officer?" "Yes." "Why?" Leonard looked down at his hands. Because the answer was complicated. Because titles disappeared. Because life changed. because sometimes a person wanted to do meaningful work without everyone knowing their history. I wanted a quieter life. Rebecca studied him. Then she looked back at the files. You realize most people would have used their background the moment this happened. Leonard nodded. I know. Why didn't you? He answered simply, because the truth should matter even when nobody knows who is saying it. Rebecca leaned back, and for the first time since the meeting began, she looked less like a lawyer reviewing a case. She looked like someone who understood the person sitting across from her. The next morning, Rebecca made one phone call. Just one. To someone she trusted inside the State Education Oversight Office. Not to make accusations, to ask a question. A question about financial transfers connected to private academic institutions. 2 hours later, the answer came. And it changed everything. The money was not missing. That was what made it harder to find. It had been moved carefully. Small amounts, different accounts, different categories. Always under the limit that triggered deeper review. But combined together, a pattern appeared. Over 18 months, hundreds of thousands of dollars connected to scholarship funds had been redirected into a consulting structure controlled by an outside company. The company that employed Thomas Bellamy, the consultant, the man who supposedly had no reason to touch student records. Rebecca placed the report on the table. Leonard, he looked at her. This is no longer just a school policy issue. He read the document carefully. What is it? Financial misconduct. The words sat there, heavy, final. Leonard did not celebrate. He did not smile, because behind every number on that page was a student, a family, a future changed by someone else's decision. That afternoon, Rebecca contacted the school board. Not with threats, not with accusations, with evidence. A formal request for preservation of records, emails, financial documents, access logs, everything. The response came within an hour. Principal Whitaker requested an emergency meeting. The boardroom at Westbridge had never felt smaller. Annalise Whitaker sat at the head of the table, 3 board members beside her. Thomas Bellamy joined by video call. Rebecca sat across from them. Leonard sat beside her, not behind, not in the corner, beside her. A small difference, but everyone noticed. Whitaker looked at him. Mr. Hayes. Leonard nodded. Principal Whitaker. Her eyes moved briefly to Rebecca, then back. I was not aware you had legal representation. Leonard answered calmly. I was not aware I needed it. That sentence landed harder than anger would have, because everyone in the room understood what it meant. Leonard had not wanted a fight. He had wanted the truth. Rebecca opened the first document. On March 4th, scholarship records were altered. She placed a second document down. On March 5th, several financial aid accounts were adjusted. A third. On March 6th, access records were modified to suggest involvement by someone else. Thomas Bellamy leaned toward the camera. This is speculation. Rebecca looked at him. No. She slid another page forward. This is a timeline. The room became quiet. Leonard watched Whitaker. Not her words. Her reaction. The small changes. The pause before she answered. The way her fingers moved toward the edge of the folder. A person trying to control a situation. A person realizing control was disappearing. Then Rebecca said something that changed the entire room. Before we continue, I want to address something else. She turned slightly toward Leonard. Mr. Hayes has been described in several communications as a security employee who overstepped his role. Nobody spoke. Rebecca continued. That description is incomplete. Whitaker's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. Rebecca looked at the board members. Leonard Hayes served as a judge for 22 years. Silence. Not surprise. Shock. The kind of silence that happens when people realize they built an entire opinion on missing information. One board member looked directly at Leonard. You were a judge? Leonard nodded. Yes. And you never mentioned it? No. Why? Leonard looked around the room, at the people who had ignored him, the people who had dismissed him, the people who had decided his value based on his uniform. because I believed the facts should stand without my title. Nobody had an answer, because there was no easy response to that. For the first time, Principal Whitaker looked smaller. Not physically. The room was the same. The table was the same. The walls were the same. But the balance had changed. The person she believed she could control was no longer standing alone. And the people in the room were finally seeing what had been there all along. Leonard Hayes had never been powerless. They had simply mistaken his patience for weakness. For the first time in weeks, Annalise Whitaker had no prepared response. That was what everyone in the room noticed. Not the documents, not the numbers, not even the revelation about Leonard Hayes' past. It was the silence. Because Annalise was a woman who always had an answer. A statement, a carefully chosen sentence that moved attention somewhere else. But now, every direction she could move led back to the same place. The evidence. Thomas Bellamy was the first person to break. "This is being misunderstood," he said through the screen. Rebecca Monroe turned toward him. "Then explain it." Bellamy adjusted his glasses. The consulting agreement was legitimate. "Agreed." Rebecca nodded. "The agreement itself is not the issue." She lifted a document. "The issue is why your company accessed student financial records outside the scope of that agreement." Bellamy opened his mouth, stopped, opened it again. The room watched, because explanations sounded very different when they had to compete with documents. Principal Whitaker finally spoke. "Everyone needs to be careful here." Her voice was controlled again. "Almost. This school has served thousands of families. We cannot destroy reputations based on incomplete information." Leonard looked at her. He had heard that sentence before. Different rooms, different people, same strategy. Focus on the damage of discovery, never the damage of the action. Rebecca placed another file on the table. "This information is not incomplete." Whitaker looked down. Rebecca continued. "We have financial transfers." Another page. "Unauthorized access records." Another. "Altered approval histories." Another. "And communication between the consulting company and administrative accounts discussing scholarship allocation changes." The room went quiet. Even Thomas Bellamy stopped trying to interrupt, because the final piece had arrived. Not suspicion, not theory, proof. One board member looked at Whitaker. "Did you authorize this?" The question was simple, but it changed everything, because until that moment, Whitaker had been speaking as the protector of the school. Now she had to answer as a person connected to the problem. "I approve the consulting arrangement." That was not the question. The board member's voice was different now, less polite, more serious. "Did you authorize these changes?" Whitaker looked toward the window. A small movement. Almost nothing. But Leonard noticed. He always noticed. People looked away when they were searching for distance from the truth. "No," she finally said. "I did not personally make those changes." Rebecca nodded. "That is correct." A pause. "But your authorization allowed access." Whitaker looked at her. "That does not make me responsible for another person's actions." Leonard watched the room. There it was. The final defense. Separate yourself from the consequences. He had seen it many times. Then Olivia Brooks entered. Nobody expected her. She walked into the boardroom holding a folder. The teacher who had been afraid to speak weeks earlier. The teacher whose name had been used in a false access record. She looked nervous, but she walked anyway. "I have something to add." Whitaker's expression changed. "Ms. Brooks, this meeting is already in progress." Olivia looked at the board. "I know." Then she placed the folder on the table. "These are my personal records from the night my account was supposedly used." Rebecca opened it. Inside were timestamps, phone records, home security logs. A complete timeline showing Olivia had never entered the school. The false record was not just suspicious. It was fabricated. The room had reached the point where silence became impossible. Every person there understood what had happened. Leonard had been chosen because he was easy to dismiss. Olivia had been chosen because she was unlikely to fight. Students had been chosen because they had the least power. The system had not failed by accident. Someone had designed it that way. The board chair finally spoke. Principal Whitaker, effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave pending a full independent investigation. The words were calm, professional, but everyone understood what they meant. The position she had protected for years was gone, at least for now. Thomas Bellamy disconnected from the video call minutes later. No dramatic exit. No final speech, just a blank screen, a person disappearing the moment he could no longer control the room. After the meeting ended, Leonard stood alone in the hallway. The same hallway where he had spent years checking lights. The same hallway where students had walked past him without knowing his story. Olivia approached. I owe you an apology. Leonard looked at her. For what? For not speaking sooner. He shook his head. You spoke when you were ready. That should have been earlier. Maybe. He looked at the empty corridor. But courage does not always arrive at the same time for everyone. Olivia smiled slightly. You really do talk like a judge. Leonard looked at her. No. A small pause. I talk like someone who has seen what happens when people are afraid. That evening, Leonard went home earlier than usual. Maya was waiting. She looked at him, not asking, just watching, because she already knew something had changed. Did you fix it? Leonard placed Bluebird on the table. He thought about the word. Fix. Some things could be repaired. A broken door. A damaged lock. A broken light. People were more complicated. The truth came out. Maya smiled. I knew it would. Leonard looked at her. How? She shrugged. Because you kept writing. He laughed softly. And for the first time in weeks, the weight in the house felt lighter. But Leonard knew something else. Justice was not complete because one person lost power. Justice was complete when the people hurt by that power were given something back. And there was still one final thing to do. 3 months later, Westbridge Academy looked different. Not from the outside. The stone buildings were still there. The gardens were still trimmed. The same students still walked through the same gates every morning carrying backpacks and unfinished conversations. But something inside the school had changed. Because trust, once broken, could not be repaired by a new sign on a wall or a carefully written announcement. It had to be rebuilt through action. The independent investigation concluded exactly what the evidence had shown. Thomas Bellamy's consulting company had been used to redirect scholarship funds through unauthorized financial arrangements. Several school accounts had been manipulated, student records had been altered, and the system that was supposed to protect students had been used against them. Annalise Whitaker resigned before the final board decision was announced. The school released a public statement acknowledging the failures. The scholarship program was rebuilt from the ground up. New oversight procedures were created. Every financial decision required multiple independent reviews. No single person could quietly control the process again. The students who had been removed from the scholarship list were restored. One of them was Jordan Mitchell, the same student who had stopped in the hallway weeks earlier and asked Leonard if he was okay. He found Leonard outside the school one afternoon. You were right, Jordan said. Leonard looked at him. About what? About the truth. Leonard smiled slightly. The truth was always right. Jordan laughed. You know what I mean. Leonard nodded. He did. The boy looked toward the school building. I thought nobody would believe us. Leonard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, sometimes people believe the loudest person first. A pause. But that does not mean the loudest person is correct. Jordan nodded. And that lesson stayed with him. Olivia Brooks also returned to the classroom. The experience changed her. Not because she became someone different, because she stopped waiting for permission to speak. One afternoon, she visited Leonard's home. Maya opened the door. You must be Miss Brooks. Olivia smiled. How did you know? Because Dad says you are one of the people who chose courage. Olivia looked past her toward Leonard. You told her that? Leonard looked embarrassed. I may have mentioned it. Maya smiled. She knew her father well enough to know that was his version of a compliment. A few weeks later, the school board offered Leonard something unexpected, a financial settlement. compensation for the damage caused to his reputation, a public apology, and a position on a new student ethics committee. The offer was more than generous. Most people would have accepted immediately. Leonard listened carefully. Then he declined the money. The board chair looked surprised. "Mr. Hayes, you are certain?" Leonard nodded. "Yes." "Why?" He looked through the office window. Outside, students were walking across the courtyard, laughing, arguing, planning futures they had not yet imagined. "I don't need payment for someone else's mistake." The board chair waited. "Then what would you like?" Leonard thought about that, then answered, "Create a program." "What kind of program?" "One that teaches students how to understand their rights, how to ask questions, how to recognize when something is wrong." He paused. Not every child will have someone standing beside them when the system fails. The board chair nodded slowly. "And you want to change that?" Leonard looked at her. "Yes." The program was called the Bluebird Initiative. Maya chose the name. Of course she did. When Leonard told her, she looked at him with a smile. "You finally used it." He looked at Bluebird, resting beside his notebook. "Used what?" "My idea." Leonard laughed. "You mean your pen?" "No." She pointed at the pen. "The meaning." He looked at her, and he understood. The pen had never been about luck. It had always been about hope. A year later, Leonard stood in front of a group of students inside the same auditorium where he had once been accused. The same room, the same lights, the same wooden table, but everything was different. Students sat in the audience, teachers watched, parents listened, and this time, Leonard was not standing there because someone had underestimated him. He was standing there because people wanted to hear him. He wore no judge's robe, no special title, just a simple jacket and the same calm expression he had always carried. Bluebird rested in his pocket. "I want you to remember something," Leonard told the students. "People will sometimes decide who you are before they know your story." The room was silent. "They may judge your clothes, your job, your background, the way you speak." He looked across the audience. "But your value was never determined by what they noticed." A pause. "Your value was determined by what you chose to do when nobody was watching." That evening, Leonard and Maya sat at their kitchen table. The same table where they had talked through the hardest days. She was finishing homework. He was writing in his notebook. Bluebird sat between them. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Do you miss being a judge?" Leonard thought for a moment. Then he shook his head. "No." "Why?" He looked at the little blue pen. "At one point, I thought justice came from a courtroom." He smiled. "Now I know it can come from anywhere." Maya nodded like that answer made perfect sense, because to her, it did. Outside, the neighborhood grew quiet. Inside, Leonard kept writing. Not because he needed anyone to know his name, not because he needed anyone to recognize his past, but because the truth was still worth protecting, even when the person protecting it looked like someone nobody expected.